What's up, guys? Welcome back to Engine25 Reviews. It's a show where I invite friends, colleagues, academics, filmmakers, others who are generally funnier, smarter, and more qualified than me. And we talk about movies, TV shows, and stuff we think is cool. If you like that, hit the subscribe button, ring that bell, tell your friends. Trying to get back into the swing of doing regular episodes. They usually come out on Sundays. If you ring that bell, you'll never miss one. We're available on YouTube as a video and as an audio podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public, with more to come. Apparently, Google Podcasts just went away, so that's annoying. Um, just search Engine 25 Reviews in your favorite service, no space Ninja 25, or hit one of the links in the notes down below. My name is Brandon. I'm your host. You can find me at Engine25 on all the things, sometimes with an underscore at the end. In a little bit, we're going to talk about Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese. But before we get there, I want to introduce our guests and talk about some cool stuff we've been doing. Um, Catherine Burrell is a communication PhD student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, specializing in film studies. She holds a BA in theater and film studies from Georgia Southern University. That's where I went to, and an MA in communication and documentary studies from Northern Arizona University. Daniel Singleton earned a PhD in English with a specialization in film and media studies from the University of Rochester. He has taught courses in literature, film, media, and writing at several schools across the United States. He's a published author. You should give him a Google search and check out his stuff. Um, hey guys, how are you doing these days? Katie, go ahead.
Tired.
Fantastic.
Bad school life.
What about you?
My easily, so I'm thrilled. She after I put her in her bed, it's always a gamble as to whether or not he's going to make me sing an orchestra's worth of songs, or if she's just going to say bye, Dad. Tonight she said bye, Daddy. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm gonna get out of here.
Love it. I have a 2-year-old niece who is adorable. But yeah, I don't deal with bedtime stuff that happens at my brother's house.
It's a whole experience, man. It's nothing else is quite like bedtime with a 2-year-old.
Love it.
Unique.
Other than Flower Moon, what have you guys been watching lately? See anything good? Anything? I know Katie was just talking about some stuff for school. What about you, Dan?
Well, it's, movie wise, I have been watching a few other Scorsese films. I kind of doubled back and rewatched Gangs of New York and After Hours. So,
Okay.
but most of my downtime, I've been playing the Arkham Knight game on Steam Deck. So that's I'm like deep into Batman. I actually started reading The Dark Knight Returns earlier today. So I'm kind of like spreading out on a bunch of different things.
Good choice.
But all sort of in noir-y.
Katie, anything in the pre-show we were talking about some stuff you're doing for school, but anything you want to mention other than Flower Moon? If the answer is no, that's cool.
There's so much. No, it's good. It's just it's an ingrained part of my life as part of the grad school grind and what I've chosen to do with my free time. I made the very productive mistake of putting together my free time to go to the movies with an ethnography project. So I've been to the movies a lot, but some of the research coming out of it, the things that I'm seeing have to do with spectacle and like the new things that are not new releases at the cinema. So like I saw the Britney Spears re-release of Crossroads. I saw that with some friends of mine, and that was really fun. That was like, I mean, I'm going to end up writing something about it. And for Halloween, I have a really great local cinema. Shout out to Amherst Cinema. And they program some really cool stuff. And they had some really awesome stuff going on for Halloween. So I got to see the 1931 Dracula big screen. Was just like a whole weird thing in itself. And that was really cool.
Nice. I'm a big fan. Good old Bela Lugosi.
Yeah. Oh, no. It's a rough movie to watch back, but you can appreciate it. It's such
luckily it's not very long, and it's like all of the like right at the beginning of the 1930s, like talkies were just like in the last couple of years become a thing, and it's like, but movies are still like very much like plays. Not a lot of filmmakers had really figured out how to do it differently than that. Um, and I was like, certainly Dracula is like very much like a play. Like it's just very, yeah, very,
Well, and it's
Yeah,
based off of a
the
play.
script
yeah.
is the script is basically a yeah. I mean, I think Bela
That's fair.
Lugosi was the author of that play. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
um,
the staging and the blocking are just it's very like everything.
Yeah.
The camera always points the same direction. They do a lot of close ups on Bela Lugosi, but it's like it's just the blocking is very much like a play. Um,
And it was so
so
interesting to like watch these people, and it's a pretty diverse like audience at Amherst Cinema. Like they bring in lots of different people, and
cool.
but
Love to
to
hear that.
watch them watch it was kind of crazy because like I knew all of these things, right? Like I'm filtering through my knowledge, my encyclopedia in my head, and I wrote a field note of like one person saying something like, well, like all the action happens off camera. And I'm like, yeah, that's because it's like a play. That's what happens in Shakespeare.
Yep.
I'm like, they were gonna be able to like do it on camera. So they're cheap ways for you to like try, and I was just like writing the notes of what I was hearing. And yeah, it was really cool.
That's really fun. I would
Right.
be interested. I mean, I would see that on the big screen, but I would definitely be interested in seeing it with an audience that is not as familiar with it as I am. Because like everybody's seen this movie. You either watched it in school or it came on TV when you were awake at 3 a.m. Like, so it's
Seen it before.
yeah.
Ever.
What?
Yeah, no, I'd never
Okay.
seen it.
Well, that's
And so
that's
that was my
interesting. But
first time. Like I
yeah, yeah,
knew about it,
right.
and I'm much more familiar. Like I took an
I've got
adaptation
all those
class.
old monster movies on DVD. Like
Yeah.
we talk about my love of monster movies on every episode. So that's just me. But um,
I knew the book, right? I took an
right.
adaptation
I mean,
class.
and
I knew
it's
the
like
book. I knew the Coppola version, but I'd never seen the 31. So it was cool.
um, I've been watching a lot of TV. Um, Gen V on Amazon. Oh, did Dan lock up?
Maybe.
I'm gonna keep going.
I think I'm back.
No, okay,
Oh,
yeah,
there
yeah,
you
all
go.
good. Just internet is
Yeah,
slow, and that's yeah. We record the show over the internet, and that's just how it goes. Yeah, is it Gen V? It's a spinoff of The Boys on Amazon. I'm really liking the Frasier reboot because I love Kelsey Grammer. The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix from Mike
I watched
Flanagan
that.
is
Yes.
I'm not done with it yet, but I think I've seen 6 of them, and it's nuts, and I love it. And
Yep.
then Lessons in Chemistry on Apple TV with Brie Larson is very good. It's like uh being an intelligent woman in the 1950s sucks. Spoiler alert. Um,
Wow, I had no idea.
yeah, yeah. And then just today, I got back a couple hours ago. Yesterday and today, I was able to attend the Rome International Film Festival in Rome, Georgia. They call it RIF. Was invited by a filmmaker friend who had a film screening. Her movie's called Nine Windows. So a fun little indie horror thing. Um, it was the first film filmed at the at full s- the full s- the new new vast I'm gonna finish some of these words. The new volume stage at Full Sail University in Orlando. They have a not 360 but a you know hemisphere uh video wall set, and that was the first film that they filmed there, and it screened, and it's really fun. It's kind of a take on Rear Window. The filmmaker's name is Lou Simone. She's done some other films that are available. All of them are available on Tubi, I think. Um, we got to see new movie directed by Ethan Hawke called Wildcats about author Flannery O'Connor, played by his daughter Maya Hawke, best known for Stranger Things. Um, Flannery O'Connor is an author in the Deep South, deals with a lot of religious stuff. And she was in the film, she gets diagnosed with lupus, which is the disease that killed her father. There's some unfortunate, dealings with she has to learn how to deal with that, and her health is just gradually deteriorating as the film goes on. It doesn't carry it out to her death. When the film's over, she's still fairly young. I think she's in her 30s. Um, but struggling. She's a writer, struggling to find success doing that, and it intermixes adaptations of her short stories, which all deal with there's always religious themes and the uh it was weird. I liked it. I wouldn't say it was a great film, but it was structurally very interesting. Um the cast is very good. Maya Hawke, Laura Linney, Liam Neeson has a small part in it. And then after the movie, there was a little Q&A with Ethan Hawke and Tim Blake Nelson, um, he wasn't in this movie. He had another film screening today that I didn't get to see, unfortunately. Um, but so that was fun. And then today, saw a movie called Guacamole Yesterdays, which I really enjoyed. I was telling Katie about it a few minutes ago. It's like a woman is in therapy because a relationship has just ended, and it uses as a framing device to kind of look back at the history of their relationship, like very loving but very complicated relationship between two artists. um and it's the therapist has a technology that allows her to go back and adjust memories. You can change the way you perceive some of your memories, so it has a very light um sci-fi slant to it, kind of like kind of reminded me of like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind in a way. um and no, it was visually very interesting. There's really great use of color, and they changed the aspect ratio depending on when in the timeline it takes place and whether or not it's a memory versus something that's actually happening in the present. And no, Guacamole Yesterdays. It's not available anywhere right now. This was the premiere, but it's some local filmmakers that I was able to meet today, and they were lovely people, and I was very, very impressed. It's a fun little indie movie that I think people should be looking out for. Um, Anywho, moving on to stuff closer to the real topic. Um, I've got a fun little anecdote about kind of my background with Scorsese films and how Dan and I met. I'm gonna tell a little story. We were in high school videography class when we met. It would have been fall 2006. Um, yeah, yeah. So I'm not gonna say how many years ago that is, but we're getting there. Um, it was the year The Departed came out in theaters. Um, well, you asked me if I was looking forward to it, and at the time, before the movie came out, I really wasn't. You asked why, and like at that time, I was not a fan of a lot of recent Scorsese films. Like, I still don't like The Aviator. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work for me anyway. It doesn't work at all. Gangs of New York has grown on me, but like, I think it's really it's a handful of good performances and like otherwise an overstuffed cacophony of a movie. Um, I don't think I had seen Bringing Out the Dead at that point, but like it's fine. I think Casino's overrated. Like it just stands in the shadow of Goodfellas, which is deals with some of the same themes and is a much better movie. So like at the time, I hadn't really liked a Scorsese movie since Cape Fear and the Goodfellas. Um, and then that Friday night, I went to see the Godfather. I went to see The Departed, and it's one of my favorite movies N at this point. I love The Departed. And I love a lot of those older, Scorsese movies, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, like all the ones everybody knows. People know them because they're great, but there was certainly a stretch of Scorsese in the '90s that, in the '90s and early 2000s that, like, most of them are okay. It was a low point in his career, I think, but, I love The Departed. I have some things to say about Killers of the Flower Moon, both good and bad. Um, and, there's been ups and downs since The Departed, but you can't I'm not gonna argue that Scorsese isn't a legendary filmmaker. It's like he's one of the great American directors. That's absolutely the case. Even, I would say all of them have some missteps or at least films that don't work for me personally along the way. But so that's kind of where I'm coming from going into Scorsese. What about you, Dan? Tell me about your uh Scorsese life.
Yeah, well, I'm a big Scorsese fan. So I'm that person who honestly kind of likes them all, though I completely agree with you. Like mid that like aughts kind of stretch is the one where those are interesting movies because it's like, oh, like The Aviator, like you're filming the 20s sections with this like two strip Technicolor. You're recreating old Hollywood. Like there's stuff like that that like speaks to me, but like the as like a whole film, they don't. Those are not like quite at the same level as the films that sort of come before and after that.
Yeah, like the
Um,
making it look like an old movie thing. I was like Hugo. That's
yeah,
in 2010, 2011 or something like that. And I think he pulls off that part of it much better in Hugo than he did in The Aviator. Like trying to
yeah,
celebrate old cinema.
yeah. The best two films from that period, IMO, are Hugo, which I actually wrote about in my dissertation.
Nice,
So
excellent.
that's one that's near and dear to my heart. But Shutter Island is the one that, like, from that period, just like that is a great movie. That's like doing all the old Hollywood kind of like love that all those other films are kind of trying to do too. And I find that one just holds up to rewatches so well because
I should check that out again. I've seen it a couple of times. I remember liking Mark Ruffalo very much. Um,
yeah, he's really good
I
in it.
will I've already told a lot of stories, so I'm not going to waste too much time. But like that was interesting for me because I first saw that on a date that went poorly. So that was fun. Anyway, no, yeah, just
Yeah,
yeah, some funny personal anecdote with Shutter Island. Like I remember liking it and not loving it, but I do like very clearly remember Mark Ruffalo's performance stood out for me for sure.
yeah. Well, that one's fun. No, I mean, I'm kind of the opinion, just generally, that he's like the sum is more than the parts with Scorsese. If you just kind of
And
like step
ultimately,
back.
I would agree with that absolutely. Like I said,
Yeah,
like there are
yeah, for sure.
all of these directors have had movies that don't work. Like, and um that's how it goes, and that's par for the course for someone who's been in the business for 60 years. Like that's just that's just
Yeah, right.
simple economics is what uh or just statistically you're bound to have a couple that aren't up to par, and you deserve to have those because of the other ones are so great. What
Well,
about you, Katie?
there's
You've been holding your tongue here for a minute.
Must admit, I am not as familiar with these films. I have just never really been drawn to them at all. And I've been looking back through his directorial filmography here, and there's some things that stand out to me. Like I liked The Wolf of Wall Street in 2013.
I
Like
like
I'm
The
not
Wolf of Wall
a
Street a lot. Yep.
fan of that. But then, a couple years later, I tried to watch Silence and I just couldn't. And I was excited for it based on the cast and the premise, and I just
I
couldn't.
I think Silence is good. I think it shares some issues that Killers of the Flower Moon does, but well, I'll explain that a little bit more in a bit.
I also just couldn't with The Irishman.
I'd never
Could
finished The
not.
Irishman. I'm right there with you. Well, I watched a good chunk of it, but I never got to the end.
What I have seen of Hugo, I really liked. And I think that's like kind of like that's a very like on par statement with anybody that studies film. It's like I have a reference for this part and I know I like that. But as a whole, I haven't seen the whole of Hugo, but I want and need to. Shutter Island is another one that I've always held in high regard. I've never spoiled it for myself, so I've actually never seen it, and it's what I want. I think it's on my list to see. I might watch that later because um, I in 2010 I was a freshman in high school, so I don't think I was allowed to go see it. Maybe not, or I wasn't into it.
No, yeah,
Which
I was
I
in
know.
college and it was before
No.
no, yeah. Just
So
life.
I can't so much like critique the
Sure.
filmmaking as a whole or the filmography or do a lot of that kind of like placement that I would normally be able to do. But what I can and have been thinking about in terms of Killers of the Flower Moon is the the situation of Martin Scorsese and this film's production, um, in context with the narrative and the things that have been happening in the world, and its emphasis and missed opportunities, and how Martin Scorsese's kind of been like, in my opinion, digging his own grave with fans, but
I don't
not
know
so
that
much as a filmmaker.
yeah,
So
there's some indulgence happening, maybe a little bit
yeah,
of I'm not going to use the word hubris, but I think it could be applied here. Um,
yeah, yeah.
before what one more note, Dan. I know you got to hang out with Marty recent. You're old drinking buddies. You and old Marty. No, but you went to an event that he spoke at, right?
Yeah, so shout out to my in-laws who are regular kind of like, several years now I've been going to the Montclair Film Festival in Montclair, New Jersey. It's basically it's Stephen Colbert and his wife. It's like one of their ways they give back. So they help kind of orchestrate this film festival in New Jersey. And every year Colbert interviews somebody, and this year he he was going to interview Martin Scorsese. So my in-laws were like, Dan, come on out, you should come see this. And I said, yeah, absolutely. This yeah, so it's great. I mean,
That's what Stephen Colbert was teasing on his show last week. He was like, and I come,
oh really?
we're gonna talk to this. We're gonna talk to this. I was, out wherever doing an interview with this, Hollywood person. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that must have been what you
Yeah. It's like his the thing that he claims he looks forward to it every year. So if he plugged it on his show, then that was actually true. But yeah, no, it's great. I mean, they talked about everything from the best New York pizza to just sort of like, what is your artistic project all about? What have you been working on for 50 years? If you could step back and kind of sort of like give us the big picture. And it's it really kind of comes down to this is a Scorsese grew up in a very like tight knit Italian American community in New York City in the 1940s, and was deeply, deeply kind of enmeshed in two dark mystical spaces, church and movie theater. And for a lot of years, he wanted to go to the church and sort of work out all of his complicated thoughts about humanity's like complicated, contradictory nature through the church. But then he didn't really want to do that, and so he decided to do exactly that same thing through movies. So the faith and like sort of the guilt and sort of the Catholicness of it all was a big subject of their discussion, because obviously Colbert is Catholic too, so they could really connect on that. So it's great. It was really great to hear him. I mean, this is like arguably the greatest living filmmaker, and just to kind of hear him sort of talk about his process kind of in real time and sort of what interests him was like really just just like wow. It was easy to see how he gets such good performances from everybody, because you're just kind of like he's talking and you're like, wow, yeah, I'm on board, Marty. Tell me more. I can see it. So you can totally see how why people love working with him. So that was fun.
I love to hear that. That's
yeah, really. I memean, every interview he gives, honestly, it's like he is just so that's he just has that kind of like energy, and the energy kind of comes through in his films, I think. But I felt very proud of myself. Every movie he mentioned, I was like, oh, I've seen that. Nice. Mentioned like 7 or 8 movies.
Like there are quite a few. It's
yeah.
Yeah, he threw out a few curveballs, but I got those too, so I felt very proud of myself. That was what my film education got me. The ability to follow Marty's conversation.
And that's not an easy thing.
No.
A lot of them are difficult to find these days. So
yeah, right. They are.
I'm gonna redirect the conversation now, specifically towards Killers of the Flower Moon, which is the real reason why we're here. 25 minutes into the show. um, Killers of the Flower Moon is directed by Martin Scorsese from a screenplay by Scorsese and Eric Roth. Had a budget of around $200 million. Seems absurd. Seems like a lot. Um, and then as of November 4th, 2023, it has earned $89.3 million since the release date on October 20th. Um, Reminder that we're spoiler free for the first segment. Um, Dan, you go first. What did you think of Killers of the Flower Moon?
Yeah, so I saw it a couple of weeks ago. So my memory's a little fuzzy at this point. So I'm going to speak kind of in generalities.
No worries.
But my general impression was that it was really, really great. Scorsese definitely has a very he has very distinct periods where if you could like to carve up, his body of work, you can kind of say that early 2000s period was sort of like this, okay, he's kind of trying to still be a mainstream filmmaker, in the Hollywood system to a degree from, Gangs of New York and certainly The Aviator on to about Wolf of Wall Street, Shutter Island. But like since about Silence in 2016, it kind of feels like that those three movies, like Silence, The Irishman, and now Killers of the Flower Moon, you can almost sort of group off as like a very late. Like it feels like Scorsese's late period. It's like he's very, he's at a point where he's getting older. He's almost 81. He only has a certain number of movies left, or that he can kind of put together. And he is seemingly just kind of burrowing down deep into like these sort of like, very Catholic, to go back to what I was saying a second ago, these very like elemental questions about what keeps us going as people, like what do we need to believe in to exist as people, and like what kinds of good things and terrible things are we capable of at the same time. And Killers of the Flower Moon kind of was just, a really captivating contribution to that, series of films that he's been kind of putting together over the last few years. Of the three, I probably liked it the best. Silence, I quite like.
Three, I would say I like this one.
Yeah, The Irishman was like honestly the one that I liked probably the least. I mean, I liked all of them, but this one kind of, there was just something about. I mean, we'll get into the details more, but like just this one was not just kind of a movie about these individual characters and how they're their individual kinds of sins and guilts, but it had that. I mean, it did what all the best westerns do. It kind of connected that personal and sort of individual story to the larger kind of myths we tell ourselves about how the West was won. To quote the title of the famous 1962 film. I mean, it's like it was really, really exciting kind of see Scorsese sort of take, what he's been working on with all of these like these guilty guys doing terrible things, but also like being aware that they're doing terrible things and then connecting it to this larger kind of national myth. I mean, he sort of does that with The Irishman and some of the other gangster films, but the Western is like almost so unique in how it's like directly about how the United States was made and how American identity was formed and all that. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where I land on The Irishman. Just a really great, expansive, it's his Heaven's Gate, big, expansive, national kind of myth making, or deconstructing kind of movie.
I'm gonna cut in before I go, Katie. You're muted, by the way, Katie. I don't know if that was on purpose. Yeah. There, I like this movie a lot. I found a lot to like in it. I did not love it. I think there's structural issues. I think the movie's grueling, and it may be intentionally so. Um, but like this it's 20 minutes longer than like Oppenheimer came, and I use that as an example because it's a historical movie, 3 hours long, came out this year, relatively recent. It feels like it's 2 hours longer than Oppenheimer. Uh, and that's when I say that, like I like the movie a lot. I definitely think that um it's got some pacing issues, and even like if you cut 1 second off every shot in this movie, which I absolutely think there's room to do, it would have been under 3 hours, and it wouldn't have changed any of the content. Um, we sit with a lot of things for kind of a long time. I think that there are like the landscapes in this film are beautiful, um, and there we sit on those landscapes, or like for an outdoor scenes, the camera kind of snakes around and dances, and there's a lot of oneers in outdoor scenes that like are very pretty, but often like didn't seem super motivated, and that kind of thing just inflates the runtime. Um, and it's interesting in comparison to like indoor scenes are very basic coverage, shot, reverse shots. You have a medium close on two actors, and you cut back and forth. And that's just kind of the way Marty does it. That's not a criticism. It's just if it's very, very basic, and it's kind of in contrast to the outdoor stuff like I was talking about before, a lot of long takes. Um, I do think there are incredible performances in this movie. I absolutely think that's like this is an important story to tell, and that this movie deserves to be seen. Um, we can I know Katie and has some thoughts on the real world situation surrounding this movie, both in the past and in the modern day. Like in the film as a film versus the film as history. Um, but no, like I liked it a lot. I think it has some issues. I think the production design is incredible. I think that the performances are incredible, particularly Lily Gladstone was a real standout for me. Jesse Plemons does a lot while saying very little in this movie. I know there's some. I'm curious what you guys both think of Brendan Fraser's performance, because he's not in the movie very much, but he's very big. He's a very, very boastful. And I thought that was kind of fun. I thought it was appropriate for what they were going for in like the latter parts of this movie. Um, I ultimately, like, I don't know if it's um up there in my favorite Scorsese movies, but I do think it's very good. It's thematically complex. Um, I think it's got some problems structurally. There are questions I would like to raise as to who should have made this movie. Was he the best choice? I don't think he did a bad job. I think maybe there are others who could have um it then again, like it would be different if it was made by a different by another filmmaker. That may be good, that may be bad. There's just questions that I'd like to field to you guys regarding those thoughts. But yeah, it's good, not great. Like it's definitely an experience. Like it's a hard watch. It's a difficult film to get through, as a lot of Scorsese films are. It's not, like I was talking about how much I love The Departed. It's because The Departed is a really fun movie. Like the in addition to all the intricacies and the thematic material and it's Scorsese at its best, but it's also like it's just a really fun watch. And this is not that. Again, I wouldn't say that's a criticism. I'm just pointing out differences um uh between some of his movies. And that's kind of where I stand on it. I have a lot of thoughts. Some good, no, some not so good. It's an important story that needs to be told. I think that there are the reality of how Hollywood works. If this were given to a lesser filmmaker, it would be it would be a less epic film for sure. Take it or whatever that could mean for because I'm picturing a film that is not and will not be made, and comparing it to Killers of the Flower Moon as we got from Martin Scorsese. So, so that's always a speculative, difficult thing to do. But like, it wouldn't, for example, if it was given to a Native American filmmaker, there's no way that it would have had a $200 million budget. So there would be concessions made on the scale of the film for certain, and that is the reality and economics of filmmaking is the reason that this budget is, or I mean, that this film had such a large budget and is so epic and sweeping as it is because it's directed by Martin Scorsese and it has Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro on the poster. And that brings you the budget. Um, Again, like I've said it a couple of times now, but I like the movie. I definitely have some thoughts that we'll break down in more detail. But Katie, let's hear it. I know you're somewhere closer to me. I feel maybe worse.
Oh, much worse. I have a lot of thoughts, and I am very happy to have them contradicted, and would like anything that I don't touch on that we've kind of already brought up in conversation to be brought back up too, because this isn't a movie that I'm going to be seeing again. I just really didn't vibe with it.
And
Many
I
different reasons.
will back you up on the point to say that while there is a lot that I do like about this movie, I probably agree with you. Like, it's going to take a lot for me to sit down and watch this again for a lot of reasons. Partly because of the subject matter. It's heavy and intense, and it's a rough watch that way. But there's also, again, I think there are some issues with the execution that aren't egregious but are absolutely there. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna end up, I think, probably kind of backtracking on some of the points that were brought up because I,
Please contradict me.
yeah, I don't think this movie needed a $200 million budget, and I do not think that what the final product is reflects a $200 million budget.
I don't think I was
It
surprised
did
when I
not
saw
need
the
it.
budget number. I don't even so okay, like if we cut it in half, if it were given to a lesser filmmaker, it's not going to be $100 million, it's going to be 25.
I mean, like, even like, what is a lesser filmmaker? Like, if Martin Scorsese really wanted to tell this story and tell the Native American part of the story, which is not actually the main focus of this story, he could have
I want to talk about that for sure. Go on.
he could have co-produced it or co-directed it with somebody who could effectively tell that story. But at the end of the day, this is not a story about the Osage. It's a gangster story about these two men or all these men and then the other people, including the Osage, are affected by that world in horrendous ways. So I don't agree. I don't, I'm seeing like so much of the marketing and the interview and the conversation around this film being about like it's about the Osage because they rewrote the screenplay from being about the formation of the FBI. This is still not a movie about the Osage. It's about things
And
that
that
get
is
done to the Osage.
I will agree with that, and I will I like you mentioned the FBI thing because the novel, apparently, person who hasn't read the novel but has read a lot about the film and the making of the film, the novel kind of focuses specifically on the FBI investigation of this, which comes in like the latter half.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of additional research and additional material that is drawn from for the first chunk of the movie, for
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, for
And
sure.
it's
It's all about the what brought the FBI there, right?
right.
So, I mean, but that shouldn't be applauded. That's like just choosing the story you want to tell, like what's gonna work
Oh no, yeah,
best, you know?
I'm just making observations, not
No,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
I'm not.
yeah,
I'm responding to the rhetorical
sure.
happenings in the world, like, and so and this there was an original version of the screenplay for whatever movie Martin Scorsese was going to make about this topic, which was it was adapted from the source book material, right? And so that's what it was. And then apparently Leonardo DiCaprio said something like, "Well, let's like rework the story, make it more interesting. We don't need to make an FBI story about this." And so then they come up with a story about men exploiting the Osage. right? And while I appreciate and applaud the efforts that went into incorporating accurate cultural representation into this film, that doesn't mean that it's about these people. You know, it's not about what happened to them, it's
I
about
agree with
what
that.
happens to them. So, you know, I have, um, I appreciate the knowledge about his intentions conflating, like, exploration of humanness and what it means to be human and life and death, like, either through the church or through cinema. Like, that's amazing. And I can like and respect that and appreciate that in this film all day long. But I don't think a personal exploration of the meaning of life through cinema also predicates an obsession, almost like egotistic. I don't want to use the word, but I kind of do. Like insertion of the self into narrative. And without giving anything away, Martin Scorsese does that in really big ways that I don't think needed to be in the story. And the connotations of how and why he does this are evocative of an agenda which is not about serving a cultural message or spreading historical information or a cause or support of a minority group or an indigenous group or whatever through cinema. The things that he ends up doing are in service to him in the film, which pander to a specific audience, i.e., the Academy, through representations of cinematic history. And then he presents himself as like a Wellesian figure. Um,
We'll talk about exactly what that means in a little bit. I there
so
there
basically, this is
like
a
the
film about filmmaking and not about. Um,
and it's I will um rebut a little bit like
Please.
the the themes that like we're talking about like there's a a very important um part of this movie I think is about like the very first scene is the I'm gonna go ahead because I wanna talk about things in detail. So here on you've heard our you've heard all of our kind of general thoughts, but it's gonna be more difficult to break down some of this other stuff without spoiling stuff. So if you have not seen the movie, I recommend you well, I do recommend you see this. I don't know that I recommend it's worth a big screen watch. Maybe one of my other panelists will disagree with that. Like I think it's an important story. But yeah, just so everybody knows, here on out, full spoilers. We're going to talk about the plot. We're going to talk about the ending. So if you haven't seen the movie and want to, I recommend you do that before you listen to the rest of the podcast. Um, there is like the first scene in the movie. Um, there is a group of Osage kind of mourning the fact that their children are they're going to have to speak English and their culture is going to get blended with the white people and it's going to be diluted and then that ultimately that leads into the striking oil that kind of thing and then it comes back around near the end like oh like we have grown up and yes we have to live with the white people but we're still able to celebrate our own culture all of that stuff is in there, and I think it's very important that it's in there. I would say that it is diluted and it is not as large a focus as it should be. I think I think again it's in the film. I think it's important that it's in the film because it's a big part of the story. But it is I think those messages are kind of diluted in favor of some of these other things that you're talking about. So I'll agree with you on that. Um,
Mm.
no, it's just there Dan said it, like, there's a lot of information here, um, and it is, some of it is in service of the Osage story. A lot of, I would say a lot of it is in service of the story with, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, his name's Ernest, um, and his uncle, played by, Robert De Niro, um, but it's a very complicated movie. In
I
Yeah, please. We've been talking. Yeah,
yeah,
please say. Cut me off.
no. No, my thought is, I mean, this is we're kind of getting at, in some ways the essential sort of crux of not just like Scorsese's, filmmaking, which is so wedded to the perspectives and the points of view of his characters in so many films. I mean, that's kind of his uniqueness as a director, is that he does films which are kind of told from the point of view of the participants kind of better than anybody outside of like Hitchcock, maybe. And so that perspective and whose story is being told is, in some ways the central sort of choice that had to be made artistically, because as y'all are pointing out, the book is this narrative from the point of view of the FBI. So you have white FBI guys coming into Oklahoma, solving a crime. That's the point of view of the book.
And the point of view of the film is largely, at least, from the point of view of a different set of white people, but not the FBI. Yeah.
Yeah. So how that happened, as y'all are pointing out, they're trying to sort of write the story as the book is kind of telling it, and they're realizing this is just not going to work cinematically, and they're sort of trying to find a new angle onto the story, and the angle they settle on is this one of these guys who is kind of part of this larger conspiracy to marry the Osage women and then slowly kind of poison them and then take their money, was, by all accounts, according to the people who he's talking to, like deeply, deeply in love with, this woman that he's slowly killing. And that kind of became like, let's examine what his experience is, as that's happening. And let's like kind of use that as a metaphor for what white America kind of did to the Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, like, there is another movie that can be made kind of specifically from the point of view of the Native Americans. But I mean, this is just kind of where I guess just me as a viewer, I kind of am like, yeah, I would love to see that movie, but I don't really see it as an either or. I feel like, the story of like white America destroying Native America, I mean, like that's a story that is really like, you're not going to understand how we got here if you're not kind of understanding like the complicated sort of darkness,
Yeah.
in the psychology of those men. So I'm kind of a little bit like, why? Like, yeah, I mean, Scorsese is going to be able to make a specific kind of movie, but I kind of think that there's also room to be sort of argued that, like, if he's not Native American, I mean, is he really the best person to be making that story from a Native American point of view? And it's like, no, probably not. If a Native American filmmaker is not going to be able to assemble Robert De Niro and all these actors,
I mean, that's what I was trying to say in the first part. Like, on that point, I absolutely agree. Like, there is no good answer to this.
but let's talk about.
Okay.
No, let's talk about like the effect on the audience, because as Katie, you're pointing out, like a lot of the people who are going to see this movie are like the film festival crowd, like the Academy. I saw, the people who were at the Scorsese talk with Stephen Colbert were largely older white people. They were in New Jersey. It's like this is definitely like the mass audience. There is a pretty wide audience for this film, but it's also kind of like segmented more towards the kinds of people who go to art films or sort of who are in culturally prestigious positions in society.
Yeah.
And then the question kind of becomes like, for that audience, what are you trying to do? And if you're trying to like get that audience to sort of see, like, yeah, these bad things were done to the Native Americans, and that's certainly a path you can take, but you can also get that audience to really kind of examine its own complicity in that process. And that's something that I think you can kind of get from that point of view that you don't necessarily get from telling the story from another point of view. It's like you don't really get to
and that
You know what I
makes a
mean?
lot of sense. Like, and who is the movie made for? I'll let you go in a second, Katie. I promise. Who is the movie made for? Like, is always an important question. And if it were made for the Osage people, like it would obviously be very different than it is. Um, and that is, and it's definitely made for the festival crowd, but at a budget of with that many zeros, like it has to be to a degree mainstream, or it was funded with the intention or anticipation that there would be a mainstream audience uh angle like approach to it. And whether or not that's creatively bereft, I'm not making that judgment. I'm just saying, like, the when I saw the budget for this film, it raised a lot of questions for me personally. And it's, there should the story be told by another filmmaker potentially, if uh, you don't get the name talent and you don't get the money that you had to make the movie this way, if that were the case. Go ahead, Katie, please.
There's just so much to unpack because, like, yes,
There is. There
no, I
absolutely
mean,
is.
is it important to have stories and representations where complicit white people confront that complicity? Yes. But making a movie for a specific audience doesn't have to be that, like, it doesn't have to be that way. You know what I mean? Like, they could make this movie and not, promote it as something that's so representative of a people.
The
And it's
promotion is
not, because
absolutely a problem. The way the movie is promoted is absolutely a problem.
the film is not made by Native Americans. Like, it's just not. And so when they bring that perspective into this thing about, like, we've done so much for the representation of Native Americans, I'm like, in one way you maybe have, but in one way you haven't. The representation problem in Hollywood is not necessarily about the story. It's about the structure. It's about who is making these films. So if somebody like Martin Scorsese wants to explore what it means to be alive and what it means to be a human in cinema, and have things like a budget, a healthy budget, and amazing people to put on the bill, he can still do that and not solely direct it and insert himself into this issue. He doesn't have to do that, and we could still have the same film or something.
Well, but then doesn't the film just not get made in that scenario? Like, like if he's not making, if he's making another movie, I mean, who else is making this movie?
And that's part of the. It's so difficult to speculate about all this. Like, that's the because we're talking about movies that did not get made in
Right.
and framing them around this one that we have. So and that's there's no like, it's a complicated question that I don't have an answer for, and that's why I brought you guys
the
on here to talk about
representation
it.
question is so hard to answer because we could go back and forth on this all day. And I'm like, yeah, well, then it would be a different movie. Because I just also don't think this movie needed to be made. Not like this.
Well, it's sort of it's a larger problem that the Western has never, it's sort of, he's inherited a thorny issue from the genre in which he's chosen to work. I mean, this is like what, movie number 27, and it's his first Western. And the thing about the Western is, as a genre, it's a bunch of stories about cowboys going out west and winning, conquering the landscape, and so on and so forth. And we had a bunch of John Wayne, John Ford films that kind of construct that myth, and we had Sam Peckinpah and Clint Eastwood deconstructing it, and Kevin Costner, and so on. And yet, at the end of the day, I mean, there's still sort of like this core set of elements from the Western, and you often are still kind of dealing with stories about white guys going west. And the question that someone asked me a few years ago when I was at Iowa was really powerful, because we were one of my colleagues and I were talking about Westerns, and the question that got posed was, is it possible to make a Western from the point of view of the Native American? Or in the process of restructuring the story around the Native American, you lose so many of the themes that we associate with the Western. You keep the setting, obviously, it's the West still, but like you lose so many of the themes of like nature and civilization and the wilderness, blah blah blah. That are you functionally you're not even a Western anymore. And so in making a Western, I mean, Scorsese has kind of inherited that problem. You see it in Dance with the Wolves. I mean, that's sort of like the archetypal example. Like we're going to make a Western that is, and it ends up being like Kevin Costner goes and lives with the natives, in some ways that's what Scorsese has kind of inherited, and it's maybe it speaks to, again, the Western has a point of view, and its point of view is maybe just, got some hard kind of borders around it, and it's only capable of sort of seeing the Native American from the point of view of whiteness. But I mean, I don't know. That's
more is that like there's all those issues, right? Like all of it. And then if I left everything else behind and I'm just like, okay, like, yeah, like let's just take this movie as it is, and I'm not going to raise everything I just raised. On top of that, like just like having that as it is and letting that be a representative story in itself. Cool. The real problem that I have is the framing of this film around that specific white Academy audience. Because of one, the way that it references like the early like films in the 20s with like the intertitles and the talkie cards like in the beginning, and they make it look like an old film. So right when you walk into this movie, like all the cinephiles and people are going to be like, oh my God, virgins of cinema, like just over the moon, right? Maybe. But that thought is already evoked. And then we get to the end, we go through this whole drama, right? This whole narrative. And then we get to, it's been a radio show the whole time?
I was going to say, like, oh, well, I wasn't. I think some kind of framing device could have helped this movie, at least like from a structural and pace point of view. The radio show is an interesting choice, but like the way it's incorporated here, it feels like a swing as opposed to like something that was really intentional. And then with Marty showing up himself, like that's just like cringe inducing. That's a huge problem.
Oh no, that's the best part, man. That's the best part.
Is it?
The artist has the last word in his own film.
The artist always has the last word. That's he doesn't have to show his face for that to happen.
Word is about Molly's story. So why does he get the last word in this Native American story that he's trying to tell? Like that's where I have the issue. And even if we say, okay, fine, he's the artist and he's the one delivering this, and we just leave that issue aside, I have a problem with him self-framing him like in Orson Welles and inserting himself into this so obviously as kind of like a spokesperson for a historical tradition of cinema that is obviously on the brink of change.
Is he inserting himself into it, or is he reflecting on the fact that as the person, making all of these stories, he inevitably is kind of already in the story, Because I didn't read it as him inserting himself. I read it much more self-reflexively as an effort to kind of acknowledge that as a older white guy from New York, he is only going to be able to ever get so close, There's a similar kind of artistic move. I don't know if anyone's read Sophie's Choice, the William Styron book. Really, really great. Really great book, really great movie. But the book is really fascinating because Styron is it's a white guy from Virginia, and he's trying to write a Holocaust story without, getting into the thorniness of like, well, I wasn't there, and I'm not Jewish, and I'm not even European. So what can I say about this tragedy? And so he kind of builds, this complicated kind of framing story where, and it's similar to what Scorsese is doing. It's like kind of allows you to be like, hey, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this really important thing that like we need to hear about and we need to sit with and we need to talk about. but I know that like my point of view is only going to take me so far. And if that's the case, like, what am I going to do about that? I can either like try really, really hard to like overcome that distance between me and my subject, but I'm never going to get all the way there, and it's always going to feel kind of fake. So what can I do? I can reflect on the fact that my point of view is rooted in a very specific spot, and hope that maybe that point of view speaks to the point of view of a larger audience and sort of helps break down some of those barriers. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just
That
kind of
in the
like,
film itself, like that's what he's doing, like in making a film, right?
yeah,
So he doesn't
right.
have to come out and literally show himself on screen. He just
It seems
literally
very
inserting
indulgent.
film
Like
stills of himself
when
into the
Dan,
thing.
you'll know better than me, but like I know he's been in his movies before. It's few and
Yeah,
far between, but it has happened before. But it's like this
he's
one.
in like, honestly, more and more he shows up as cameos, and they're very like cameos a lot of the time.
This one, like it's like a hmm. It's indulgent almost. Like it stuck out to me in a way that like when Tarantino shows up in his movies, like, and it's always in a way that's very obvious and like just very calling attention to himself in like a very intense way, as opposed to like the Alfred Hitchcock
Yeah,
cameo where he's just a guy, like he's always just a guy on the street or something like that, where he's always in there. But if you blink and you'll miss him, but it's, I don't know, it's just very,
yeah. I mean, I have
I'm
a
not surprised that he
preference.
did it. I was surprised at, like, how front and center it is, and it just kind of didn't really work for
Yeah.
me. Uh,
Well, honestly, I mean, I don't want to get morbid, but I mean, this is like every movie he makes nowadays could be his last film.
that's
You
absolutely
know,
true,
he's
and we're dealing with
very,
that, like,
yeah,
Clint Eastwood is still making movies, but he's even older.
yeah,
Steven Spielberg's in his mid-70s, like, they're keep making movies
right. So I
as
mean,
long as you can, but that's the reality of
it's
humanity.
yeah. I mean, and I think you have to kind of read again. Some of this is just like this is an artist at the end of his career, really kind of getting self-reflective about his position in this larger kind of artistic trajectory. And, in the context of this particular story where point of view is so critical to, what the film is kind of about, I mean, it just seems totally appropriate for the director to sort of show up at the end and just kind of, I mean, it's like like that's what Godard did. That's what, so many, like Hitchcock was doing it throughout his career. I mean, it's kind of a signature, it's him signing off quite literally,
And a
in
very
multiple
old Hollywood
senses.
style then,
Mhm.
and I would
Yeah.
put, even like the Godard example is like, in line with the new Hollywood, which is now also outdated. Right. So like that all makes sense. But in the context of, and like I said, I'm coming at it from not like the film itself. I'm coming from this very like more cultural studies. Like what is this saying outside of the film itself? What is this saying outside of Scorsese himself?
I mean, and that's, I don't think those
So
2 things are unrelated, but,
Mhm.
like, because you can't I don't think you can really examine this film without crack it, you know, that's unpacking a little bit of the cultural implication, but, also it doesn't
so I ask,
things that aren't in the film aren't in the film, but, if we're having this conversation, there are things to do with the film that aren't in the film that must be discussed.
so if he wants to have an impact or like put his mark on his film as like, like an end of my career thing or, like reflection, that reflection could be done in ushering in a partnership of creative filmmaking with somebody from this community. Like there's just so many other ways to make that happen that aren't necessarily in like what gets put into the film itself. Because what gets put into the film itself is him literally stepping out onto a stage and reading the life story of a female
It's
Native American character.
to add some very, very basic context, it's like what you would have at the end of a movie where you just have a cue card that says, Molly married again and died at the age of 50, like this with specifics about each character where you come up with maybe a photo or just some text. But instead of doing that, he's Martin Scorsese, and leading up to that, some other folks, they stand on a podium, read a script into a mic as if it were a radio show. Um, like if it were, it could have been an Osage individual who read the same thing, and then I don't know, like you lose the the kind of point of view that Dan was saying. Um, and then you would obviously, but it's a lot less Wellesian. Um, it's I don't know,
It's
like it's a
oh,
complicated
yeah.
it's a complicated idea, and it was definitely a choice, and it's a choice that has been talked about. There's a lot of discourse around it, and it's um certainly not the only thing there's discourse around. That's what there's so much to unpack with this movie, and we
Like, you could
absolutely
have
don't have
had
time to
Lily
do it all. But
Gladstone read it as an actor in this thing, right? And have the same movie. Everything else stays the same, but that one moment changes the resonance and the
I don't know if it could be
implication.
Lily Gladstone, because the implication is that this is still diegetic. So it's like you're adding additional context to Lily Gladstone's life, and she wouldn't have walked into a white man's radio show to talk about herself into a microphone after the things that have happened to her. I don't believe that.
That's
So
where I mean, I get it.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
So like
It's
it
like,
could like
well,
I think it should be an Osage individual. I don't know that it should be Molly either. Um, I do want to talk about Lily Gladstone, because she is my favorite performance in this movie, and I wish we got more of it, even considering that it's well over 3 hours. But, and that has a lot to do with, she's out of commission a great deal of the film because they start to poison her, about halfway through. Um, but, she does quite a bit with very little. And she's fun and she's funny, and she's got a little smirk, and there's always some extra context inside that little smirk. It's not, like she's not always being flirtatious. She's a very smart uh person that is, she's there's always wheels turning in a very subtle way, and it's like I absolutely adored her. And they're ugh, if without Lily Gladstone, like this movie doesn't work. It's that it's her performance, even though like it is limited compared to the runtime, like it's that crucial to the whole thing. And if there's anything about the movie that works, it is Lily Gladstone, and the other things related to Lily Gladstone's character shine all the more because she is in here. Um I think it was an interesting it's an interesting unusual role for Leonardo DiCaprio. Like he is almost always like a very intelligent, well-spoken character, with the exception of say like Django Unchained, where he pretends to be he's pretending to be that, and he's actually just a racist idiot. But the like no, in this one he's like he's almost a simpleton, and I don't mean that in an offensive way, but he's a very down to earth, not well educated, just came back from the war, saw, he didn't really see combat. He was a cook, I think is what he says. Um, but it's a very different role for DiCaprio, which I think that's certainly worth bringing up. Um, because I think he does a good job. I think um if there's anyone in the main cast that I would probably recast, it would probably be Leo. Um, I enjoyed Robert De Niro as the old guy who's orchestrating all of this, and it's a very that was is a very Scorsese kind of role, and Robert De Niro does a great job with it. Um, I do, like I said, I do kind of think Leo's miscast here. It's a little bit different than his normal thing, and I don't think it fits like a glove. Um, and maybe you guys disagree. If please interrupt me at any point. Um, but really, no, like I said, the crux of this movie is Lily Gladstone, and I don't think it works at all without her. Um, I
Yeah, it's her movie in a lot of ways. I mean, she's like the center. It's not told from her point of view, except very briefly for
she's
a couple of shots.
she's the emotional
But
core of the movie. Like when something terrible
yeah.
happens, it's Lily Gladstone's character that tells us like visually, emotionally how bad it actually is. and that is
Right.
until
And,
until like they begin to poison her through a number of adding some context just for listeners. A number of the Osage are diabetic, and this is very early on in diabetic treatment. They they have discovered that you can be given insulin, and in this case, it's insulin sourced from other animals. But then they the Robert De Niro forces Ernest to begin mixing something bad with her insulin, so she's very ill for a big chunk of the movie, and like that's a loss you definitely feel. Because I would say the first 80 minutes or so of this movie are very, very good, and I was all in until as until we approach the second half, and then it definitely has its moments after that, but there's you definitely feel the loss of Lily Gladstone's character, and it's not because she's dead, it's because she's out of commission for large portions of the movie because she's being poisoned.
Mhm.
But even so,
If she's the
go ahead,
emotional heart, if she's the emotional heart of the story,
please.
I would call her the story, right? I would call her character Molly the story and Ernest the
Molly.
plot. Ernest is the plot. He's the one that like drives it forward. He's the one that kind of is doing the things, right?
Yeah,
But
and Ernest
she's the
is
story.
absolutely guilty here. Like um I don't want to skirt around the fact that no, it is uh Ernest who is at at the 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 order of his uncle. But Ernest, played by Leo, is absolutely committing these crimes. He is murdering people. He is poisoning his wife. Like, there. Do you guys think that he actually loves Molly? Because like I think that he does, but I think that he's uh hmm, I'm not going to say that he's not in the wrong. Like he's doing absolutely unspeakable things. Um, but I there's some conversation and implication that there some white folks are marrying the Osage with the intention of taking advantage of them or murdering them. And I think that was his uncle's plan all along. I don't think that Leo was 100% in until he was. Like I think the interactions he has with Molly are genuine early in the film, and then it it gets worse from there. And you can't defend Leo's character. He does unspeakable things to this woman, but it is like I think there was for a time some, at least the way it's shown in the film. I don't know. I'm not speaking to historical facts, but the way it's this portrayed in the film, like I am willing to believe he had legitimate feelings for her. Um, Noting the fact that they're, he murders her immediate family and he poisons her, and you can't unlink those two things.
I think from looking at the film structurally, the first thing that we kind of figure out before he marries her that he's very emphatic about is how much he loves me.
That's true.
You know?
That's
And
true.
so that predicates his relationship and how it evolves with Molly. So Ernest, first and foremost, if he loves her, first and foremost, he loves money.
Like, yeah, and again, like he's absolutely a shitty person, and I'm not. I don't mean to say anything to the contrary.
the thing that's really what I really admired about the movie and kind of compensated for things I might have quibbled about is just the way that it is. You do for the entire community. Not just Ernest, but also like Robert De Niro's character, the King. And the other various minor characters who are marrying these Osage women. I mean, the one of the things you get from that expansive runtime is you just get a lot of time to sit with these characters kind of in these spaces. And it's really, really some of the most fascinating moments in the movie are just these moments where like you see these, like a white guy and a Native American guy out on the road, and they're drinking and they're just shooting, just talking shop. And then, the white guy pulls out a gun, shoots the Native American guy. because that's part of the plan, but before that, they're drinking, they're hanging, they're talking. It's like you're seeing this incredible contradiction just play out over and over again throughout the film between, on the one hand, they're spending a lot of time and they're living with these people and they're learning their language. I mean, Robert De Niro speaks so many of his lines of dialogue kind of in the Osage language. I mean, it takes a long time
The
to
Osage,
learn language.
in general,
Yeah.
they believe that he's on their side and they respect him, and like he's wealthy and he's a white man, but he has created a persona for himself that the Osage
Well,
are able to trust until the secrets start to come out.
Well, you see kind of, this is what's really one of the other things that's really fascinating. You kind of see them sort of rationalize it. You sort of see them being like, we love these people and that's why we have to kill them, or that's why we have to let, sort of nature take its course or help nature along. It's like you really kind of get through sort of the psychology of these really complicated characters who, on the one hand, care about these people, connect with them on some basic level, but also are killing them for their money. I mean, you're through kind of seeing that psychology, you get a really close up look at the ideology that guided so much of our conquest of the frontier over centuries. Like billions and millions and millions of people, who moved west told themselves these stories about the Native Americans that they were confronting. We admire them. We love their connection to the land, but their time has come, and we will do our best to ensure that they shuffle off this mortal coil in the most graceful way possible. Like that, you do not get what happened in the United States without a lot of people thinking like that. So that's sort of what I feel like. I guess that's my answer to the Ernest, does he love her? It's like, yes, he absolutely loves her. And that's why he allows himself to be kind of suckered in by Robert De Niro. It's like, no, we have to.
And that's what, I think he loves money, he loves women, he makes that very clear. But I like this way you say that he's suckered in. Ernest, he may have met Molly or some other Osage woman and married and been happy, but without his uncle, his uncle is they call him the king. You mentioned that. He's absolutely taking advantage of Ernest as much as he's taking advantage of everybody else. It's just Ernest is just complicit to it. Ernest is aware of it, which almost makes it worse, or does make it worse.
Well, and you see, it's what's fascinating too is you see he then he's being enlisted in this plot, but he's also enlisting other people in this plot. And there's that one guy, I forget his name, but he's basically just like, you got to go do it. You got to go, make it happen. Yeah. And then there's a lot of emphasis too in those scenes on just get really drunk, get him really drunk, you just get out there and make it happen. It's just it's this, you see this complicated web being kind of woven, where anyway, but yeah. It's a big web of a network of people who've kind of rationalized that what they're doing is good for them, but also good for the people that they're killing. That's the rationalization you get to kind of watch.
This is it's an American frontier story, and you're absolutely right. I appreciate the way that you explain Americans spreading out west and eradicating or forcing natives to evacuate, and they think that they're doing the right thing in doing that because they found some way to rationalize it, or they're greedy, or they're what have you, or all of the above, so that's absolutely what's happening here.
It's a very complicated and what was the word that you used earlier, Brandon, about the relationships in the movie? It's so thematic. Because the connections between these characters and what the movie is actually about, it's all so complex, right? And I think it mirrors the complexity that of how this film is situated, like outside of itself, right? And the extra diegesis of like the real world implications of how this film got made, could have been made, coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? And I think that's indicative of like the Hollywood state right now, just the state of things, the state of Hollywood structurally as an industry and audiences and mass shifts and audience appeal and audience even going to the box office and
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Yes, like all of it is so, and the Oscars themselves have been struggling for years, right? And so like even like trying to keep a hold into like an old academy with a new academy, it's so complicated, right? And so I think like if we're talking like, in the grand scheme of things, like this could be a movie that we point and say, this is really indicative of like a vast, complicated network of issues and topics and people and predicaments and of 2023, right?
I can tell you, I'm going to miss Marty when he's not making movies anymore, because I kind of think that
Me too.
when that generation is gone, I mean, I just don't know who else is going to be making big 200-minute, movies that are trying to turn an individual like episode in history into a larger metaphor for like. 'Cause I will be sad when he's gone. It's just like. It's just it's sort of the end of an era, movies like this. They really are. It really is kind of a throwback in a lot of ways.
What are you going to say, Katie?
Let me ask you then, because like, how did you just describe this movie as like a cinematic look at one event and like having it be like thematic or speak to something larger than itself?
Yeah, I mean, he is using the story of Ernest and Molly and Ernest's own kind of contradictory sort of relationship with Molly, where on the one hand, he loves her deeply. On the other hand, he's killing her for his money. That is, that is the metaphor for what, white America did to the West. That's his kind of contribution to the body of Westerns that are kind of breaking down the myth of the frontier and kind of critically sort of exploring why it was that we went out that way and did all those things and built the nation that we built, and moved.
I do want to mention, Westerns are a quintessential piece of American cinema, but like how many of those Westerns just portray cowboys, white people unceremoniously killing natives and and celebrating it.
Right.
And that is not what this movie is doing, and I want to make that clear. It's making a statement against that approach. We're talking about whether that statement's clear, whether the filmmakers are appropriate to be the ones to do it, but I do want to separate that, like, because you keep talking about
Right.
Westerns, and so many American Westerns are not doing the same thing that this movie is doing.
Oh yeah, he described it at the talk, and this is a really interesting phrase I hadn't heard before. He's like, we already had revisionist Westerns. So what comes after revisionist Westerns? And he kind of talks about this as sort of like beyond revisionism even.
Well, that's interesting.
So what he's kind of doing, yeah. Well, I mean, it speaks to what he's doing, which is he's taking the structure of classic Westerns, which are framed from the points of view of white guys, as Brandon says, who are going west and doing a lot of killing, and it's reframing it not as this heroic kind of mythic, thing that must be done so that civilization, capital C, whatever that means, can emerge. It's being framed as something dark, as something destructive, as something that quite literally and metaphorically poisons, the community, and is making it impossible for anything to emerge except, just ashes, like you can't. It's like that's the concept.
Very interesting and relevant and salient. And I'm just going to keep going back to the audience perspective, because like most audiences are not going to get that, and even most audiences who are like the general like white audience who would probably go see this are also not going to pick all that up. So
Oh,
there's a difference
who cares?
there in like intention versus like what the actual
Yeah.
impact is. And I mean, it's very interesting, but I wanted to ask about like how you described this film and like if anybody other than
Mhm.
Scorsese could make something like this when that generation's gone. And I'm like, the words that you were using, just generally speaking, not getting into the Western, because again, this is like the only Western he's done. So we
Right.
can't talk about all of his stuff in those terms. I'm like, it sounds like Oppenheimer to me. Like you could say Christopher Nolan is taking a very thematic look at like what happened between these two people at around this one thing in history and what do we do with that moving forward? You know, it's
Sure.
like
Yeah. I mean, you could. Yeah. I mean,
just to pit these two movies together that are going to end up
yeah.
going against each other and are in the same conversation in the same year, like they're definitely not at the same generation of filmmakers. So it's not like we're like, yes, like he has a very specific filmography, a very specific vision, a very specific oeuvre, but like, you know, he's not the only one who is tackling things or has been.
No, he's not. But they are few and far between, and
And
there
Christopher
do
Nolan's
not
not
seem.
American.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's
No.
just it's.
No, I know that's
Christopher Nolan.
exactly the reaction I
Oh.
wanted, Katie. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, it's just there's just a dwindling number of, and yeah, I love that Christopher Nolan does it too, but it's the number of filmmakers who will, take advantage of the enormous resources that the movie industry kind of has for a very small number of folks, and use it to like make really big, thematically complex, intelligent, movies that are trying to spark complicated conversations. I mean, that's what it's all about, And I'll be sad when Scorsese isn't doing it anymore, because yeah, I mean, Christopher Nolan's doing it too, but we used to have a lot more people who were doing it, and we used to have more people, kind of more importantly, who would write the checks, like
Whole
it's just
industrial like reworking that is creating a
yeah.
weird hurricane of conditions to talk about these things in.
Yeah, it's just the market has shifted and media habits have changed, and there's just less space for up and coming filmmakers to sort of be getting checks to make big, expansive.
Yeah,
it's all going back to ad funded linear television.
Well, I want to go back to this media question, this like media change thing, because it's a big part of like like the ending of my kind of like extra diegetic consideration of this film. Because if we're talking about the audience again, like what audience is this for? The white audience is also saying, I've heard, that why do I want to go watch, or why do I need to go see, or why does it need to be made again a movie about white people exploiting the Native American? And so at the baseline audience reading, like that's also where they're coming from. And so they're not going to get this like revisionist
I don't know
Western.
that I can pinpoint a film that has done it this way before.
Well, exactly, right? But is that going to get people into the theater to see it, or get them into a conversation to a point where they get to?
And I think that is relevant too, because most people are not us.
Yeah.
They won't sit for an hour and a half talking about a movie like we do. But
Yeah. Or taking other people's interpretations and opinions
I think
into that conversation and letting that
whoever
form and
signed
understanding.
a check with is it 8 zeros on it? Does that like they do so with the expectation that the movie is going to be mainstream to a degree. I do not believe otherwise, and that is just because like we want to be able to make films. Um we want artists to be able to make interesting artistic films. Um but if you do it in the studio system, or this film was financed by Apple because no one else would sign that check, but they do it with the expectation that they are going to make their money back. They're going to either earn $250 million in the box office, or they're going to get subscribers to come in and offset the cost. That's because this will be on streaming not too long from now. It's an Apple movie.
Mhm.
So
So
that's you
if you
you
want,
can't discount the financial implications and the financial reality about how the film industry works. But
Mhm.
like I the fact that this was allowed to be so expensive means that somebody, whether it was Marty, whether it was an industry executive, had the expectation that this would have some kind of mainstream appeal. And and it's
and
maybe it's not up to me
maybe,
to say that it does. But go ahead, Katie.
I was just gonna say maybe it doesn't because of these things that we brought in about, you know, is it going to engage the people? And so I think if we're talking about this more on the industry side, like creating that conversation between like we worked with the Osage and is this an Osage movie is also a part of that
And we will not
exploration,
know if
profit generation.
we will never find out if Martin Scorsese delivered the movie that the money people expected him to do. We don't
Um,
like we're not going to find out that disconnect.
but also
Whether it's close or whether it's
just
not.
the audience has just changed so much, and that's a part of like maybe like not knowing because he obviously films this views this film as art, right? Like obviously, and I get that, and it's obviously there. And he cares. He cares through his art. He cares about the story and what
Yeah,
happened in the
yeah, and
story through the art.
I believe that.
But
Like he is trying to bring to light some terrible things that white people did to Native Americans.
but
Whether he did it the
and
correct way, not up to me to decide.
audiences aren't necessarily going to get that either, especially when he comes out into the media and says something like, I don't know why you can't go see my movie. It's 3.5 hours long. You sit on your ass. I don't think he said sit on your ass, but you sit around in your living room watching TV for 5 hours a day. Why can't you go sit in a theater and see my movie? There are so
He's not helping
much
himself.
there. He's not helping himself because there are very different constraints, very different audience expectations, very different conditions that allow people to sit and watch something for that long, or even they're not just sitting and watching it for that long. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding between this old school filmmaker and this new landscape of like media consumption and audience.
I don't think he cares. I don't think he cares
And
at
he
all.
needs to. He needs to
No,
if he
I
wants his
mean,
movie to be received.
he's not making it, I think he's making it as much for like legacy and for film history. I mean, the final destination for this film is in some ways like the end of a class on westerns. It's the final film, after Unforgiven that you have to watch in a course on westerns, or it's the last chapter in a book, kind of charting the history of the Western. Or, I mean, like in some ways, the audience for this film is it's not just sort of like making it for, I mean, it's going to play in the immediate kind of consumption sphere. It's going to play the award circuit. It's going to hit it's going to be on streaming for a certain amount of time. But I mean, I think part of what's I think so remarkable about what he's doing is we've had such a shift towards like content, like
And
things come
we've
out.
talked about that on the show before, like cinema versus content, or like what are we doing right now? This is not cinema, obviously, but it's also not what
Yeah,
Martin
right.
Scorsese's doing.
Right. Well, I mean, he's pushing for and trying to like kind of like he's making a movie that has a shelf life, and he's kind of imagining it as being something that maybe only a very small number of nerds are going to look at. But he's imagining that like people are going to be the people who are watching this and going to get the most from it are going to invest the time. So I think, I don't know, to some of those points about like, who's this movie for? It's like, if you don't want to watch a 3.5 hour movie, then, don't worry about it. If you don't want to watch like Marty's take on this story, then, then don't, he's making it for whoever
But he's a
wants to
powerful
sort of dive
white
into it.
man in a structure of power
Not
that
that
allows him to
powerful.
make this movie. We don't have an opportunity to watch this movie not from a powerful white.
We wouldn't. I mean, we have the movie in front of us, and we can talk about that, or we can not. I mean,
I
it's
think that there could
no.
we could have gotten a $25 million version of this story made by a Native American filmmaker. It would not be anything like this. And again, not speaking as to whether this is the
We
version that
play
you
the
would make, but it wouldn't
festival.
be anything
Yeah,
anywhere
it
near
would
this
be a nice
scale.
informal.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, it's fundamentally a different movie.
Yeah.
It's, and we don't have it in front of us. It doesn't exist. So,
I mean,
I
and you
think
can't
my
review.
hypothetical rhetorical question is what would happen if somebody like Martin Scorsese used their platform and their capital in order to push that story that could have been made? What does that
I don't understand what that means. I mean, like he's gonna just go promote a younger filmmaker and give them the money
Well, that's
to
what Steven
make the
Spielberg
movie.
does.
with
Steven
them?
Spielberg is as much a brand as he is a filmmaker, and he has, he's the executive producer on dozens of films that he had ultimately had very little to do with, but putting his name at the top of it that puts more eyes on the film. And that's
Yeah, I mean, Scorsese has certainly done that for other filmmakers. I mean, I guess the question that we're kind of circling around, and we've been doing it all show, is is an older white filmmaker like Martin Scorsese allowed to make a Western? Or is that just not an artistic path that has value? And I think that's just,
I mean, I think
that's where I come.
what the American Western is it can be very problematic for today's audiences. For reasons that we've already discussed. And I think that a lot of the intention with Killers of the Flower Moon is he's trying to take a lot of those problems and flip them over. And we're discussing whether or not he's succeeded. But so that's
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think
the
like
Westerns are popular, especially with older viewers, but they are absolutely problematic.
and I think
Yeah, and is it possible to make a film that critiques those problematic elements of the genre and the history that the genre is representing without kind of falling back into and inadvertently kind of reproducing those very same problems? I mean, that's the question.
yeah,
That's the question that like every revisionist Western kind of grapples with.
Right? Go
yeah.
ahead, Katie.
And
I just, like as a piece of filmmaking too, like Brendan was saying, like the film feels clunky. It's not like it has its problems like formalistically as a film. And I just it rubs me the wrong way in the whole context of like this whole conversation that we've been having that he could come out and condemn people for watching 5 hours of content at home but not be able to sit through his movie in a movie theater.
I think some of those
Whereas,
quotes are being taken out of context.
I mean, for sure, but there's
I have
still
to
an
say,
essence there. There's still an essence.
I mean,
of-
people are like at these events are just constantly bringing up the Marvel thing, and I mean, all he's really doing is just. I mean, I don't know. Those quotes are just, some of that stuff is just so beyond the point of what like he's trying
the
to.
important thing is that Marvel movies existing aren't preventing Martin Scorsese from making films. They're potentially you arguably you could say that they're making it more difficult for the next young Martin Scorsese, the next young American artsy filmmaker to break out and get his films noticed. But it's not making it more difficult for Martin Scorsese to get funding and to make a movie.
Yeah, I mean, but that's exactly his point. I mean, his point is simply that like, yeah, they're making it harder for younger filmmakers to kind of come out and try really creative things like me and my friends all did in the 70s. I mean, that's all he's saying. And all he's saying.
I don't disagree with that sentiment.
Yeah.
The context matters, and I think like sometimes he absolutely runs his mouth at times at which he doesn't need to do that.
Yeah, and I think it just
He gets baited into like these dumb conversations too, I have to say.
Yeah,
like he wouldn't be talking about it if people didn't keep asking him about it.
That's true. That's
like all he wants to do is just like make some films that are really kind of pushing at the boundaries of what cinema can do, and sort of explore these interests. And so that's it. I mean,
your comments about legacy is absolutely true. Like, this is a movie that's going to be talked about for a while. Like, there's still a lot of I listen to podcasts, I read a lot of industry news. Like, there's still a lot of discourse weeks later about Killers of the Flower Moon. We're coming up on 3 weeks since the release, and we're talking about it for 2 hours. Like, so that's going to continue. There's going to be the next big artsy film, but again, like, it's a piece that's going to be taught in film school. Give it 5 years and it's going to be at the end of a Western class, or it's going to be like you could teach an entire course about Martin Scorsese or about 70s American cinema, when where they are, where those filmmakers are these days. There's
And aspirationally, you can even go higher out and say that I think he hopes, if things, depending on how, movies get remembered, just generally, but like I think he sort of sees this as a film that is part of a larger story that we've been telling ourselves across different media, books, oral tradition, video games. Like, just it's like the story of the West is a story of how we see ourselves as a country and how we kind of narrate our own relationship to our past and the people who were here before. And I think he's making a movie so that, like, when people are thinking about that, they can turn to this film and kind of understand a crucial kind of portion of that story.
That
So
also
I
gets into a weird gray area of like theorizing the significance of authorial intent in those interpretations, because we've talked about so much of his actual like comments and statements, which are so valuable and have changed some of the ways that I think about it. But the authorial intent at the end of the day, I think from like the perspective more that I'm leaning onto is like, when does that
I
become the
think
most salient?
his comments in the promotion about like, oh yeah, I rewrote the movie to make it more about the Osage. Like, I don't think that helped him. If assuming that actually did happen, which I'm assuming that it did, and that we were delivered exactly the same movie. I don't think him going on a microphone and saying that us helps our, like, I think it paints the movie a certain way before we ever go into it. Like, does that make sense? Do you agree?
But I also just
Yeah, I mean, reception. Yeah, I mean, the director can kind of set the reception of his film, but I don't know. I mean,
and I think he's set himself up in a way that, like, if he's setting up the reception of his film, even taken out of context or being baited into a conversation and then saying, like, you can sit for 5 hours and watch something at home. Why can't you go watch my film? Just, there's so many like audience based and like industry and shifting of consumption based issues there that, like, I don't know, something about that just rubs me the wrong way because it's totally different medium. It's not the same. It's just not. And maybe it was more the same even like 20 years ago, but it's just not anymore. And there's so many different aspects and things that come into that if
I mean,
he
I
wants
think
to comment
like
about the
television
change.
from a mechanics point of view, like, it's closer to film than it's ever been before, but the way that it's consumed is still very different. Like, if
And
you're
the way
talking
that
about,
it's structured for that consumption is different than
yeah,
structuring
like,
something
if
for
you
film.
just strictly talking about the way it's produced, it's closer to cinema than it's ever been. But the way it's consumed is still very, very different, and it's still changing constantly.
Predicated on an episodic structure, even if it is produced more and more like cinema, quote unquote. Uh, so there's just so many things that are different there that I think like it's obvious. I think it's just like an of the generation thing. I don't know. Like, please elaborate and tell me I have missed something. But there's just such a divide there, which I think is just so quintessential of 2023 and why I think this film could be like that's the one that has so many different things going on with it, of that era of filmmaking. If we get a chance to, to like look back at like more of this larger picture, which is part of the vast larger picture of this revisionist Western conversation. So like there's like two different like big scope conversations, and we're more in the middle with like this weird change in the audience being more of a factor in that reception. And so like for him to come out and say, you can watch 5 hours of whatever at home, but you complain about my 3.5 hour long movie. I think it's so indicative of a disconnect between what he's trying to do with this film and like what actually can end up happening with it.
And I reiterate, you could shave 20 minutes out of this movie and change none of the content. Like, if you could take almost 1 second off of every edit, and it would be under 3 hours. And it would tighten up the pacing, obviously, but like you wouldn't have to cut any dialogue to make this film tighter than it is. Um, you know,
yeah, but then you would lose that. I see. I should probably say I'm of the opinion that movies should either be 90 minutes or 900 minutes with no in between. Like I either want either. No, I'm serious. Like the best films are either tight 90 minutes or an expansive 5 hours. And some of the best films I've ever seen.
I sat on 3 film screenings today, and that was only possible because they were number one. It's a film festival, and one film runs almost immediately into the next, but they were all 90 minutes or less. So that's
Yeah, right. I love the tight. I mean, we were talking about Dracula and those Universal movies earlier. I mean, those things are 75 wonderful minutes. But
Yeah.
but anyway, what I'm getting at here with this is I think what Scorsese is deliberately trying to do, and it's very Sisyphean. It's very much like, oh man, you're heroically kind of like swimming upstream. The cinematic traditions that he grew up with, old Hollywood, European art films. I mean, those are gone. Like the movie theater is arguably like gone. Like I mean, they still exist. We still go see movies there, but the last 2 movies Scorsese made have been financed by streamers, and with the intention that like a lot of people are going to be blowing, kind of having The Irishman on and this movie on in the background while they fold laundry. And he kind of knows. I mean, he knows that that's just the reality that we're dealing with, But he's even within that, he's kind of. It almost feels as if he's like taking those kind of basic conditions, like, all right, I'm making a movie for a streamer, and they're going to kind of let me go long because we can, and they're going to give me a lot of money because we're at that stage. Well, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna make like a film that really just is kind of antithetical to that in a lot of ways. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I have the resources, and I'm going to make an old style, like a film which kind of embodies my idea of cinema as an experience. It's embodied, it's temporal, like you have to actually go and sit and sort of set yourself out from the world. Like he's trying to sort of give that a last hurrah, because when he goes, I mean, yeah, we have some Christopher Nolans who are still kind of doing it, but it's not to get to even Nolan, you have to swim upstream. I mean, this is just not the direction our moving image culture is moving in. And, there's not a lot individually, one even really great filmmaker can do about it. But, there's
I feel like this is the
value in kind of
dialectic.
What?
Katie?
I said, I feel like this is the synthesis phase of our dialectic.
Yeah, right. No, it is. I mean, well, it's oh God, Marxist dialectics. It's fun, man. Thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. You get to new ideas by charging other ideas at each other until new things happen. Collisions and explosions of thought. So,
like Oppenheimer.
Yeah, right. Well, Christopher Nolan read a little bit of Marx, to get through that screenplay. But yeah, I mean, he's trying to, yeah, he is. He's kind of doing a like, I am going to drop, like, I mean, gosh, this film kind of reminds. It's very slow cinema. It's very much characteristic of the kinds of things Bellatar does. Like he's not making a 7.5 hour film, but he's like kind of making his version of like a Satan Tango, or just like or one of these, like this long, these European films that are made for festivals that are literally like 4.5 hours long. And he's dropping that into the Netflix crowd. He's dropping that into the Academy crowd. Dropping that into anyone who's like, oh, it's Marty. Like he's kind of, there's something very kind of like stealthy about like, all right, I'm going to use this opportunity to make like the kind of movie that nobody's really making anymore and probably won't get to make again because there's not an infrastructure for them anymore. So he's sort of cobbling it together a little bit. But
it's like how we've got an old school, new old Hollywood. Those two terms mean totally different things in this context now, right? But we have this, let's just say old school filmmaker who appreciates the art house, who appreciates the structure of cinema and a traditional way of making films. What happens when somebody has to say with genre, with narrative, with all of these things, with all these filmmaking tools gets dropped into a streaming world?
I mean, I think that's just how he's able to get it made. I mean, he's kind of at that point where he's decided going through a studio in the traditional way is just not A, like, what does that even mean now? And B, they're not going to let me do. I mean, he's in some ways, he's kind of an independent, he's kind of become a true independent filmmaker. And that's weird to say in spite of
Yeah,
he's got all this, but he is. I mean, he is doing like what Orson Welles did, like you said, Orson Welles like took advantage of like little jobs that he would get, and then he would do what he was going to do anyway, like, I mean, that's sort of what Scorsese has done. I don't think he all cares, if like people are watching this on Netflix. And I mean, I think that's just how he got the money, and he's going to make the film that he wants to make, and we can either come out for it or not, and just kind of, it's like it's a little bit like I don't think if he was in his 20 years ago and he was like really trying hard to win like Best Director, like you can totally see how his like those mid 2000s films, like he's just like really kind of like thinking hard about what's going to play well for the audience. And I kind of think he's moved past that. Like since Silence, especially, like once he made Silence, it's like, oh, you're going to make a 2.5 hour movie, like where these Christian missionaries are like being literally like slowly tortured to death until they like renounce God. Like that's going to be like, I think kind of since then, I think he's kind of at a point where he's going to get money to make his next movie, no matter how good or bad it does. And I think he's just kind of embracing that, and if we're on for the, if we're on for the ride, great. But if not, like, I don't think he cares anymore about what anyone says. I think he's doing it.
I think what I've discovered in this conversation beyond, taking some other things into, I still think what I think, but it's a more informed opinion, and it's a more interesting landscape to be sure. But I think, like even here in this thing that we've done, like I'm an advocate for the audience, and I think in moving forward in my graduate coursework, I can know that more as like, and maybe that's indicative of the landscape of like how Hollywood is having trouble restructuring itself. Are we going to speak to the top floor of these deals that need to be made to get WGA back and, SAG back? Or are we going to look at like the other side of the coin, is the people? And I think like in that way, I'm thinking more audience focused on approaching anything these days. So, and I think like this whole situation here just kind of brings that all to a head, specifically because Scorsese knows the film.
The in the age of social media, like when you have, we've talked a lot about who this film is made for, who films are made for in general. We've talked like talking about the audience and what movies from the audience's perspective does. In the age of social media, like you make your movie, but if you make it for a certain audience, or you don't care who your audience is, or you don't care about your audience, you just attract vitriol from the audience, and then you're just like, it's going to it. I mean, you used to be able to say any news is good news. Bad press is still press, and like these is that still the case these days? Like, does Marty going on a mic and talking about how he rewrote the movie, does that help the movie? Does it hurt the movie? Does it affect the movie at all? And there are more people than ever listening to those statements. Um, because in if this was 1995 and someone was, they were probably in a movie theater 3 months ago, and they saw a trailer for a movie that says the next film from Martin Scorsese, then, oh, so I'll be back in 3 months. But that would be all that person knew about the movie. They would know what they saw in the trailer in the cinema, or a blur, this much text on a vertical in a newspaper. Um, and so they wouldn't hear Marty going on a mic talking, talking about, 'cause, and it's it's not that that media wasn't there, but it wasn't so readily available to the mainstream. People have promoted movies since movies have been made, and not, I don't want to make it seem like that's not the case, but you like before social media and cell phones, like you had to go out of your way to get that stuff. And now it just comes to your phone. So it's the world
Well,
that we're the world that we live in
of,
is changing, and it's changing media, and media is like it's just a cycle, and one thing changes the next thing, and that thing changes the first thing, and it's a big mess. Any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
I really liked the movie and want to see it again. And I hoped that I would be able to see it this week, but I couldn't because I have a 2-year-old. So I'm gonna try streaming probably the next time.
That's what I do.
We'll
I do want to say.
We'll see how this translates context.
I try to do new films. Like they usually have like an early screening on Thursdays. I've been working a lot. I'm perpetually exhausted. So just knowing that it was 3.5 hours, I went on a Saturday morning. The screening started at 11:30, and I walked out of the theater at 3:17. Nearly 4 hours later because of previews and such. So I devoted a Saturday, and like like I said at the top of the show, I like the movie. I think it has some issues. Um, not nowhere near among my favorite Martin Scorsese films. Um, Definitely a story that deserves to be told. We've talked a lot on that subject. Was it told right? Who needs to tell it? That kind of thing. But ultimately, I like the movie. I love a lot of Martin Scorsese's work. I've seen some of his films many times. Despite liking this movie, I don't know that I'm gonna like. I might watch it again to absorb some stuff more thoroughly, but not that it won't be a regular one. Like for it. Katie, have you seen Goodfellas? I'm gonna call you out right now.
No.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Well, you guys think Goodfellas.
No,
Goodfellas and Taxi Driver are like the two ones I go back to all the time. Taxi Driver is like essential.
you're gonna have thoughts about Taxi Driver for sure. But no, I'm just teasing. Any thoughts before we wrap up, Katie? Anything you want to say?
I stand by everything that I've like brought up, and
Sure.
obviously have thoughts and opinions about, just because it's also just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I'm not here to
even with
change your
new,
mind. I want to hear what
no,
you have
I
to say.
know,
That's why you're
I
here.
know, I know. I'm just, there's so much context to come into this that like it's
Absolutely.
not one of my favorite movies. I don't think I would see it again. I mean, definitely not for entertainment value. I didn't find it
No, and
entertaining.
that's
Even from
I agree.
even from a filmmaking perspective, it just doesn't jive with me, and sometimes that happens. But can I think about it in terms of like historically situated? Sure. Like I'd love to revisit that. Um, Especially from the genre question, because that's my main like genre theory is like my baseline thing. Right. So from that, like, yeah, I'd love to revisit this film in that context, but do I want to sit down and watch it again? I don't. I don't think I need to do that to talk about
there
the
are a lot
genre
of clips of this
reification.
movie that can be used to teach a lot of things. But
Mm.
as a singular piece of cinema that you sit down and experience for 3.5 continuous hours, I think that's a different conversation. You're about to say
Yeah.
something, Dan?
Yeah, I mean it's a a cinematic event. I mean, it's it's kind of like just sort of the other part of the slow cinema thing. In the slow cinema tradition, it's like every screening of Satan Tango is really special because it's a 7.5 hour movie. So it doesn't get screened all that often. So I don't know, I think there's something about like, yeah, I mean, this is one of those movies where like Goodfellas, I can watch that like every month and for the rest of my life and not get bored. Shutter Island, The Departed,
The Departed, yep.
This is a like watch this movie, carve out, your part of your day and go sit with it for that 3 hours and then absorb it and process it through conversation and reflection over the next whatever period of time it's in your brain, but yeah, it's definitely not like a Like, you know, like we're gonna sit down and just like watch Killers of the Flower
It's
Moon.
not one we need to re-experience every holiday.
I mean, it's that's why again, it's part of a piece with like silence. I mean, it's sort of like an American silence or whatever, you know, in some ways.
Yeah.
And that silence is absolutely one that there is so much to unpack with it too. You know, it's
Also a really grueling movie that you just don't really sit down and watch all that
I was just
often.
like,
Hard.
so much of this is just like just waiting for the next poor person to get murdered for no good reason.
Yep, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, it's the Catholic element. He's, you know, feels really guilty, and he's trying to make you feel really kind of guilty, and it's like
I
the Catholicness is
definitely
coming out really strong in his late career.
Go
I
ahead, Kate.
definitely have on the top of my list to finally watch Shutter Island. Finally.
I do think you'll like Shutter Island. I'm
looking at the trailer and the IMDb page right now, and even just looking at it, it looks more cinematic. It looks more visually interesting to me than anything by Killers of the Flower Moon.
Certainly for modern Scorsese, that and Hugo are probably his most visually interesting films. Like he has a style, and his style is very simple and understated for the most part. Those two definitely step outside of that wheelhouse. I think you will have some not so good things to say about Taxi Driver. And
I know that.
Yeah. And it's because of the Jodie Foster and things related to that. But
that's another one. That's you'll get a real close look at like the darkness and the American psyche, you know, in that film. Like,
I don't need that.
That's another one that's like, oh, this you want to see ideology at work in someone's brain. You know, like
maybe that's the other half of this. It's just like a Pavlovian conditioning where I'm like, no, I don't need this right now. I get it in the midst of my
that's what produces the strong response. I mean, there are a few other filmmakers, and maybe this is just where I should end it. A few other filmmakers are as good, and Hitchcock is maybe the only exception to that statement, at putting you in the eyes and the thoughts and the feelings of, you know, the characters who are in the story. And lately, like, that's uncomfortable just kind of in general, and lately he's kind of leaned into the way that kind of approach to storytelling can really sort of get under your skin, you know, and really kind of get you.
Some of the people that he's getting you inside the head of are not good people a lot of the time.
Yeah, but you can relate to them anyway. You can still relate to them even as you recognize that they're not good people.
Yeah.
And that's where the discomfort a lot of the time comes from, especially in like Taxi Driver and this one too, you know, like he's still sort of doing that. Like, I'm going to put you in the heads of people who you recognize and seem like people you might know and might even be you. And I'm going to show you how they rationalize doing terrible things, you know, and in the course of doing that. Yeah, in the course of doing
together, and the fact that for at least part of this movie, Leonardo DiCaprio's character is a taxi driver.
He does. Yeah, right. It is part of it. Yeah, right. There's a little full circle in this movie. Yeah. He's talking, and De Niro who dispatches him in the taxi.
On that note, we're going to wrap it up. As always, guys. Thanks for watching. If you want to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Brandon. I'm Engine25 on all the things, sometimes with an underscore at the end. You'll find us on YouTube and podcast services by searching Engine25 Reviews, no space in Engine25. And we'll be back soon with a new review. And until then, go watch a movie.